Hi,
Hi, how you doing?
I'm hanging in there. It's a bit warm today, so shiny from the sweat.
It is steamy. It is definitely steamy and steaming. It is so uncomfortable with the humidity.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm a little, yeah, fatigued with the heat, and I've made, like you, I have made myself a lovely hot cup of tea to to
Amazing.
really cement the heat.
Yeah, and what is the mug of the day for you? I've got the
Oh,
same old New Orleans one.
the mug of the day for me is my medieval celestial mug, which has
Oh,
90s vibes, which I like. So for the listeners, it is a sky blue mug with a medieval sun on one side with a scowly face, and then a crescent slash full moon on the other side. Again, with a very tired, scowly face. So it's not a happy mug, apparently.
it is very 90s looking though. Very kind of new age.
Yeah, that kind of like I think it's whimsy goth nowadays, what it's called. That kind of
Right.
Sabrina the Teenage Witch charmed kind of aesthetic. But I love that it's medieval as well, so it's got like both our vibes like in one mug. We've got the 90s, we've got the esoteric, and we've got the medieval. So it felt appropriate.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. So today we are doing kind of take two, part two of the first two episodes of Buffy. So we have our episode on Welcome to the Hellmouth that we learning process. So we talked for too long. We learned that literally beat by beat or scene by scene is just it's too much. So we didn't get to the harvest. Bits and bobs were mentioned about the harvest, but today we're going to do the actual focusing on the harvest
Yes.
and
And
continuing. Yeah.
yeah, we've refocused the way that we're going to be doing our podcast episodes, which we realized we get too enthusiastic as Buffy fans and we just like to talk about Buffy to each other. But we're here to be, horror academics and medievalists for the listeners. So we're going to be focusing on the juiciest bits of the episode in terms of like interpretation and analysis and medieval context and things like that. So we're going to be a little bit more tightly focused on those aspects, but still with room for the Buffy gossip and sheer joy of the Buffyverse.
Yes, absolutely. And we are still keeping, Cross Watch, which we introduced last episode with Angel gifting Buffy the giant silver cross, which I guess we can just kind of get out of the way now. That's the only cross in this episode that's worn by Buffy.
It is, and I do have to also flag like the very first shot of the cross. So the episode opens and Buffy's in that kind of sarcophagus stone coffin tomb thing with Luke jumping in on top of her.
Yes.
And then as he's going in to bite, that's where the last episode cuts, and that's where this episode opens. And then the cross is just suddenly sideways on her chest. And I remember being really confused the first few times that I watched the episode. Like, she's not wearing it, so where is it? And I think it's supposed to have been in her pocket and it's supposed to have just spilled out and then it just spills right back into her pocket when she hops out of the coffin. So it's a very awkward cross in this episode, I feel, like all across the board.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember during my research, like that was something because yeah, it's laying like the chain is all weird and you can tell it's not around her neck.
Yeah.
And it's very obvious, once she escapes the mausoleum and runs into Willow and Xander, that she's not wearing the cross because of the
No.
way that her shirt's cut. So yeah, it's kind of this they had to make it work for the sake of the story, but not quite all the way there. And that's something that not always that egregious, I would say, but
No.
that is kind of a Buffy-ism, make it work. As we were
Yeah.
saying last episode, the Hellmouth, they move Sunnydale and the Hellmouth kind of concept to fit the narrative arc rather than continuity.
They do, definitely. So it's very much a very scrappy show. I do love that. And I do want to talk to you. Like, we'll be talking about the Hellmouth, I imagine, in a little bit. But I spotted, I think, potentially for the first time ever as an academic, that there's a moment where Giles has a whiteboard up in the library and an illustration of what they think the Hellmouth might be.
The
Like,
weird
there's that kind of
optic looking kind of tunnel.
sideways funnel looking thing, and I was like, oh, like watching it with an eye to what the Hellmouth is doing, especially since we've talked about the Hellmouth in the past and how it moves around. I'd never like I'd always been in first season mindset when I saw that
Mhm.
illustration, and I was just like, yeah, sure, that's what the Hellmouth's doing. But now, having seen all the seasons, no spoilers for future seasons, but now it really is like, oh, that's what you think it was doing? Is that what you were committing to at the time?
Yeah,
Doesn't
the
fit.
whiteboard's funny too because it's behind Giles in a few scenes in the library. And the first time we see it, it has the weird kind of optic vortex physics looking image, a diagram that kind of well, it's not a diagram, it's a line with another line in it. And then there's a small flow chart. So it says
Yes.
Boca del Infierno, spirits, and something, and then vampires. And then they just kind of stop.
Yeah,
Like they
that's
were trying
it.
to map out the cosmology, but only I feel like a intern or someone, they were like, write some stuff on the board that's about Buffy, and that's what came up.
Yeah.
But the word Hellmouth isn't on the board the first time. And then the
Oh,
second time it's there in all capitals in the middle. And
yes.
then Giles, of course, erases it when he draws the tri-star symbol to explain the harvest and everything. And so it is kind of one of those funny, because we've seen it so many times, you can look at those details that are occurring in the background, just like at the bronze. It wasn't until we started this rewatch that I really looked at the sign behind the bouncer that says, it's written like a high school dance sort of thing on a poster board with Sharpie, must be 21 or being ID'd. And it's just this really goofy kind of, they had to have something there to make it look like the bronze is this official space, but it looks like something that someone was like, oh no, we have to make one in the next 20 minutes. So, yeah, so Crosswatch, done. Mystical, magical cross kind of floating about. I mean, Buffy does wear it starting the first scene in the library throughout the episode. It's very much there.
Yes. It does kind of like become its own presence. And really, you can't miss it. The thing must weigh a ton. Oh my God.
It must have been a nightmare to not get it to glare or flash with
Yeah.
the spotlights when they were filming.
Imagine the heat.
Yeah,
Oof.
you can definitely, regarding the heat, tell that with the master, he has this kind of sheen, and I think it's because he's in so many prosthetics and stuff and the makeup that I think they let him. Mark Metcalf, who portrays the master, sweating be kind of part of his weird vamp face, bat Nosferatu y, which I think was a smart choice, but kind of I think they had to improvise on that, to say the least.
Yes. Well, you do just have to make do and mend sometimes, I suppose, or make do and amend in these cases. Just, you're not going to be able to stop him sweating. He's also in that mandarin collar, shiny. That material does not look breathable. Not an
Oh
issue
no,
for
it's
a
like
vampire, I'm
leathery.
sure, but for a
Yeah.
human man trying to do a job, not fun.
But so yeah, Crosswatch, that's just trying to keep us on pace. That done, bing, part of every episode. And then we're still going to keep our scene stealers and quotes to kind of keep things light and fun, and again to see what it is that we are picking out as we watch, because we're watching separately but together. So it'll kind of, I think, show our personalities a little bit and just the bits that we notice. So those will be sprinkled throughout the episode. And yeah, for front matter kind of stuff, I think that's it. We're just ready to dive into our discussion, which is a lot about the metaphysics or cosmology of Buffy, by which I mean, or by which we mean, how the world of Buffy is, how it works, the way that it's like kind of set out for us as an audience, but then we are going to bring in our medieval expertise to kind of think about the medieval inheritance of this and how medieval Buffy really is. Is that right, Alex? Anything to add to that?
No, that about covers it. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts. Like, when it comes to Buffy and the medieval, I'm applying my medieval knowledge in a more hobbyist sort of way. I am a medievalist. I love Buffy, and so I can see these things, but Megan has really studied it. She knows her stuff. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on it today.
Oh, thank you. And I'm excited to hear too, because since you've read my Viva, you do have a little bit of a one up on me in regards to anticipating what I will say. So that'll be, interesting. Not saying it's not fair, but yeah. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to get onto this, because every time I revisit it, I think that it is so thought provoking.
Mm.
So we will, I guess, we'll go in order the way that Giles does,
Yeah,
because
I think that's good.
I think that's just how they make it make sense.
And also how it's introduced to the audience. So they kind of add
Mhm.
the layers of information. So it's not, I mean, it is exposition, but it's not just like, here is all the information, do what you can. It
Yeah,
is like he's teaching the audience at the same time as he's teaching Xander and Willow, which I think is always a cute trope.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I think following that line is a satisfying move for us to make.
exactly. And yeah, it's not like we're being lectured at by Giles, but we are. But they're micro lectures, they're bite-sized little niblets.
Yeah.
So basically, we've talked about the kind of cold open of the episode that, is finishing off where Welcome to the Hellmouth ended. We're in the graveyard and mausoleum, and then credits by Nerf Herder. And then we get this wonderful shot of a spinning globe. And we start with a Giles voiceover that then turns into, then pans from the globe to him. They're in the library. That's going to be home base. And it's Buffy, Xander, Willow, and then, of course, Giles. And so I'm just going to read quickly what Giles says. It's a small paragraph, but and then we'll also be reading his later description of vampires just because there's a lot going on. And so what we pull and emphasize, we just want to let you all know it's not like we're completely tailoring what is said to fit our interpretation. It all does work. It's just that's what close analysis is. So spinning globe. And then Giles. This world is older than any of you know. Contrary to popular mythology, it did not begin as a paradise. For untold eons, demons walked the earth. They made it their home, their hell. But in time, they lost their purchase on this reality. The way was made for mortal animals, for man. All that remains of the old ones are vestiges, certain magics, certain creatures. And then Buffy jumps in, and vampires. So, Alex, what stands out? What's going on here?
I love it so much because it breaks my brain. So we've already introduced the fact that crosses work in this universe against vampires. So immediately you are given this kind of schema where vampires are evil. That evil is a Christian evil, because if it wasn't a Christian evil, this symbol of Christianity wouldn't work against them. And it's interesting as well that it's not just a crucifix. So, for example, in Dracula, it tends to be crucifixes which have the figure of Jesus on them. The Church of England and other denominations of Christianity don't really get a look in. So any cross works on a vampire in Buffy. So that means it must be a Christian theological universe for these Christian symbols to work. But then you have this opening speech by Giles very early in the Buffy universe that says, contrary to popular mythology, it doesn't start as a paradise. So that is essentially saying that either Christianity is mythology and not as accurate as we would believe. It's popular mythology, so it's therefore kind of like downplaying it as well. Like it's this kind of
Pop culture,
point.
it's pop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not accurate the way we know it's accurate. It's so much darker than they think, which is interesting. And then it didn't start as a paradise. So you again have this layering of so I love the Victorian era, and one of the things that happens in the Victorian era obviously is they get this concept of deep time, which is where they previously had believed in creation in the Bible, in God creating everything, but then dinosaurs started popping up. I am paraphrasing so hard.
And don't worry, audience, we'll give like show notes, things to follow up on this, and deep time will recur throughout Buffy as well. We'll get
Yes.
deeper and deeper into it, if you will.
Oh, I like that. Cute. Deeper into deep time. I feel like there's a blog post there or something. But anyway, so the Victorians discover fossils and dinosaurs and realize that everything is older than they think. And so this Giles speech, I feel, kind of nods to that anxiety of popular mythology is like the surface level of Christianity. And then the old ones is deep time underneath, but it's deep theological time. So
Yeah.
it's even older than you would expect and even darker than you would expect. But it is also completely tangled. I feel like I've had a bit of a ramble. What do you think?
I didn't want to like unspool your thread there because what
Thank
you were saying, I do agree with. There is a great article by Greg Erickson that you can find on Slayage that is the official Buffy Studies journal. I'll put a link on our website and show notes. But it's called the A theology of Buffy, meaning exactly kind of what you're talking about, this non-Christian Christianized universe, and is it secular, is it sacred or theologically based? And they always kind of touch upon the God existing but not, because if you have hell, then you would think that you would have heaven by proxy, right? The other side of the coin. So Buffy, as you said from the beginning, is towing this line of defying Western Christianized popular mythology we kind of all grew up with, and the Adam and Eve, and kind of hearkening a little bit to a Miltonic, turbulent time, because Giles is saying this world. He's not saying the entire universe and the entire cosmos. It's very much
Ooh.
about this world. But then again, later in the quote, he says their purchase on this reality. So now we're getting multiple realities, multiple dimensions, and arguably multiple or infinite space-time continuums, which we will see later in this season. So, small spoiler. So, Buffy, I think, does this wonderful job of being neither here nor there, but also as it progresses, becomes much more religious, much more leaning into the theology, but at the same time, and it does that through the iconography and a lot of the symbolism, but then at the same time, it's completely rejecting that by emphasizing that there are multiple gods and goddesses and entities, and that the Hellmouth is this not only a dynamic earth, but also there is a beastie in the Hellmouth that we know of. There might be multiple. So it's just this very fascinating, and as I like to say, crunchy. There's so much to kind of think about and unparse. And also within this, so we not only have untold eons demons walking the earth, right? But we have the old ones, those
Mhm.
vestiges, right? And so we've kind of hinted at in our intro episode and then our discussion of Welcome to the Hellmouth that there is very much a weird literature influence on Buffy. And the old ones, for those of you that don't know, come directly from the master of weird literature, H.P. Lovecraft, and the Cthulhu mythos, which introduces the old ones or the great old ones that are also in this really intricate web. Alex, do you want to explain more what the who or what the old ones are?
Well, force that lies behind or beyond our world that can break through. And it is important to note that they are hostile, or at the very least, ambivalent to the chaos they enact on our reality.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting. So, H.P. Lovecraft is one of the major writers of cosmic horror. And cosmic horror is actually related to deep time.
Yes.
It's that kind of anxiety that comes through of like in a religious or a religiously structured universe, there is a God, and God must have a plan, or at least a design, or something in place. He is acting as an authority figure, and in some way that's reassuring. Even if an authority figure is an angry authority figure, at least someone is in charge, you know? So it
Yeah.
has that kind of vibe. But then you introduce this kind of concept of deep time, and suddenly the world is chaos. The world isn't structured, it isn't organized, it isn't either belligerent or kind. We don't matter.
It's
And
indifferent.
it's that. What was that? Sorry, hon. It's indifferent. Yes, perfect word. Yes. So that was kind of what H.P. Lovecraft was picking up on, that indifference. And what I really love about H.P. Lovecraft is his, although he's like peak weird fiction as we recognize it now, he was inspired by Arthur Machen and M.R. James, who were medievalists and who used medieval constructions of the universe to inform their own horror stories and weird fiction, which then bled into H.P. Lovecraft's writing as well.
Yeah, and then I mean, we will kind of beat this into you all over and over again, but then Mackin and James, they were medievalists. So their worlds are based on what you call, Alex, the medievalized universe. And so it all
Yes.
just kind of trickles back. And again, our argument is not, or our perspective, I should say, is not that Buffy is medieval the way that Game of Thrones is this medievalized space, or quite literal medieval shows, right? Like Pillars of the Earth or something. Buffy is medieval because it has these, to kind of paraphrase Giles, these vestiges, these certain magics that come from this long lasting reiteration, reinterpretation, holding on through popular mythology of superstition, of symbolism, of a universe that is belligerent or kind or indifferent, etc. So, great way to describe it, Alex.
Thank you.
And also, the great old ones on Wikipedia, they do have a small blurb if you are more interested, because it is this. It's hard to wrap your head around, as you said, because that's kind of the point. And every time I read The Call of Cthulhu, it's just very mind bending because it's all about abstract geometry and shapes that don't exist to try to evoke this awesomeness, quite literally, of like what that word can mean. Not just like awesome dude, but
Yeah, that kind of
the
the
big thing.
Yeah, it's like the dark side. Anyone who's done literature out there who may have come across the romantic sublime, which is where you stand under, like, say, the night sky and you feel small
Yeah.
and beautiful and terrified all at once in a kind of positive way when you look at the night sky.
Yeah.
Weird fiction is the horror side of that.
Yeah, so it's even so yeah, Immanuel Kant's the sublime that the romantics harness, and or standing in front of a volcano or a great fire, and that it's awe-inspiring, it causes horror because it makes you realize, yeah, how small you are. And so for Giles to then be talking about these old ones that are kind of remaining, they're waiting, and the master talks about the old ones shall rise. So they're somewhere, they are lurking or sleeping, which is how Lovecraft describes them. We're assuming under the Hellmouth, but because they lost their purchase on this reality, perhaps they're in an alternate reality, but then also the Hellmouth is a portal to other dimensions.
Yes. Although that doesn't necessarily kick in until a little bit later. I think they definitely sowed the seeds for that here. But if I remember correctly, watching the first season, the Hellmouth feels a little bit more of a tunnel to
Yeah,
one particular place, and that place is hell, whatever that means in this.
it's the master's subterranean Gothic church full of candles, but
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean,
sewers, but also in elsewhere. But also,
yeah.
Giles kind of does constantly say in this episode, I didn't realize how many times he kind of said it. At the end of the episode, because spoiler, they survive the apocalyptic threat that is in this episode, and Giles is like, well, we avoided the apocalypse, and Giles goes, we're on this mystical convergence, we may well be the only thing between the earth and total destruction. And there is this emphasis that it's a mystical space, but then it's also a physical space, and it's, yeah, again, it's the
Yeah.
neither here nor there, but it's also
Yeah.
very concretely here, but then
There
not.
There is a really weird slippage, isn't there? Because the master is trapped underground in a church that got sunk during an earthquake.
Yes.
That isn't necessarily the Hellmouth, but he is in some way trying to open up the Hellmouth, which is a subterranean space beneath Sunnydale, but isn't necessarily connected to his subterranean space. But he does rise up out of a pool at one point. So where has he just come from? We don't know. Like, it's just this weird kind of hierarchy that's introduced because, of course, you've got the old ones behind the scenes, you've got the master kind of as, like, I don't want to say handmaiden to the old ones, but it's the only phrase that's coming to mind, but kind of the second in command. And then you have the vampires, and then the vampires have a hierarchy as to who gets to serve the master, and then you have the humans under the vampires. It's organized, but it's chaos.
Yeah. Hey, it's in discussion much more of the last season, but there's a great article called Entropy as Demon that
Ooh.
I like used in my last chapter of my thesis when I was investigating the Hellmouth. I cannot recall the name of the scholar off the top of my head right now. Again, links will be included. But I love that kind of concept, entropy. So that's just a scientific term for, chaos, for things kind of falling apart as a type of demon. If this hierarchy, it's quite entropic. It's stable, but it's not.
Mm.
And this is making Buffy sound like really complicated because it is. But again, it's because we're actually looking at what they we're taking at face value what they say rather than in the show where you kind of are living it and experiencing it. So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem as complex. But yeah, if you take a stop and think about it, you're kind of like, wait, do 2 and 2 equal 4? And sometimes it's 2 and 2 equal 5 in Buffy. So yeah, any other thoughts on kind of this introduction of the Hellmouth and demonic mythology, the cosmos in Buffy?
No, I think we've unpacked what we need to unpack, and I think it leads in really nicely to our next point, which is about vampires and the creation of vampires.
Yes, and then I think that will lead in really well to our kind of more medieval theological discussion and everything.
Yeah.
So, great. So, Giles isn't finished lecturing or revealing these secrets of the world to Xander and Willow because Buffy's in basically the know, and then obviously us as the audience need to learn what's going on. And so we have the old ones, and Giles is still saying, the world is really different. The question then becomes, well, what are vampires? Because as we've kind of touched upon in our previous episodes, the vampires in Buffy are a bit different than ones we've seen previously because they can change their faces. So they don't always have the sharp, pointy teeth the way that we might think of Dracula in later films. Of course, it's different in the book because he's in the book. He doesn't always have. He has razor sharp teeth, but they're not like fangs. That
They are, yeah. He does do a little bit of shape shifting in the book where he starts off as like a kind of animalistic older man. He
right
has sharp teeth, he has hair on his palms,
homes.
and yes, that is supposed to hint what you think it's supposed to hint. And he has like this aquiline face, so he's supposed to be a little bit animalistic, but then when he makes the move to the UK, he suddenly becomes a little bit more groomed and a bit more gentlemanly,
Yeah.
but it's not really like hugely laid out.
Right. So in Buffy, and we've talked about this, there's vamp face, which is their quote unquote true face, which is the bumpy face. And that's when they get the ridges and their fangs come out and they make the snarling, growling sounds, which they can do in their human form, but it really doesn't happen that often. And then they have their alternate face, their human face, their passing in the world so they can hunt face. That is the way that body looked when it was human. Now, this is where things get really interesting, at least for me, especially. So, I'm going to read what Giles says a vampire, like their origin and kind of what a vampire is, and then we'll unpack. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I'm just getting my handy dandy thesis to read it because
I feel like you should get it bound like the vampire book.
I
In
am going to get it bound. A little tight on money right now, but now that I've officially 100% finished, it's submitted. I got my
Woo!
certificate, woo, from the university. Now that it's like done, I can like I want to get it bound, and I have thought about doing the
Do
vampire
it. Do
one.
it, please, please, please. Anyway, sorry, this is us going off track.
Okay, so here we go. The last demon to leave this reality fed off a human, mixed their blood. He was a human form possessed, infected by the demon's soul. He bit another and another, and so they walk the earth, feeding, killing some, mixing their blood with others to make more of their kind.
Infected with a demon soul. Please unpack
Okay.
infected with a demon soul. Like, how does, again, this is that confused theology, again, that I was talking about, where it makes sense. Like, when you hear it and when you're just watching the episode passively for entertainment, it's like, yeah, sure, demon soul, why not? Let's go. That's as good an excuse for why a vampire exists as any other. But then when you start thinking about how this universe spiritually works, how does a figure of pure evil have a soul? Like, is that just a spiritual distillation of essence? Or we kind of understand souls to be baseline good, and
Mhm.
then you can do bad things and corrupt your soul and
Right.
do sin or evil, become a bad person, whatever. Some belief systems then have you go to a hell or a place of punishment. So a soul, in my understanding, is that it defaults to good, like, and it can be like rarefied, you can do good things, but it never really gets better. Your soul always kind of stays at a baseline, but you can ruin it.
Yes.
But here we have a demon soul. Please unpack demon soul.
So, before we get into the demon soul, just to say that the way that vampires are created is very Stoker-esque. It's the traditional a vampire bites you, they suck your blood, and then Buffy in a later episode says, and then you have to suck their blood, and it's a whole sucking thing, to paraphrase Buffy. So that's not new. That kind of concept, that exchange, that mixing of blood. But as Alex just beautifully laid out, it's this idea of a human form possessed, infected by the demon's soul. So I put a whole chapter of this in my thesis. I got really deep into medieval theology, especially 12th, 13th, and 14th theology. So right now I won't get really into it too much, but Aristotle, so in our pilot first intro episode, Aristotelian natural philosophy. And for those of you that don't remember, it's this idea that the body is called hylomorphic. There's a tier of souls, and humans possess, unlike other living creatures or plants, a rational soul. So that's what Alex was kind of alluding to, that essence, that je ne sais quoi that makes a human human. You could also think of it as the moral compass, but the soul's not quite just conscience. And that's something that a lot of Buffy scholars have said, because this is such the way that Buffy handles the soul and its weird atheological, theological, cosmic, a la H.P. Lovecraft universe, they kind of lean, oh, well, it's a conscience, and that's the difference. Vampires can only
Yeah.
do bad, humans have kind of more of a choice. But as we will see and return to, that's not always the case. So, in medieval religion and medieval theology, the form was a very specific term used to describe the body. The form is the material, it's the matter, it's what our body is composed of. And then you have the soul, which informs that body. It's what animates it, it's what makes us us. And then, we've all seen somewhere along the line images of, the apocalypse, the final judgment, last judgment, rapture, what have you, where you have the bodies that have been buried rising from the ground and reuniting with their souls. And then and then after that unification, because it's the end of time, so they've been waiting to be rejoined, they go to either heaven, they ascend to heaven, they enter hell, usually through some sort of hellmouth or pit, and then later, starting in about the mid 13th century, purgatories introduced, this kind of nowhere space. But so the word form, a human form, that's a very interesting choice. Maybe they're just trying to be like, oh, Giles is British. And, they have the funny scene in the episode where he's like, wrangle that dread machine or something. And then he basically goes to Willow, go on the net. And she's like, oh, okay. So,
and he does kind of do that bit where he's like, that was terribly British of me, wasn't it?
yeah.
And I'm like, don't throw Ireland, Wales, and Scotland under the bus by saying British. That's the peak English. We'll own that. Tweez, shame. But go on, please.
Yeah, but so this idea of a human form is already just those two words, right? There's something really interesting going on there. And then we have possessed. So possession, as I kind of talked about when I discussed Vanessa Ives at the end of our first episode, is an interesting concept. But for, base kind of popular understanding, possession is when a demon possesses or enters into and inhabits a human. So The Exorcist from 1982 is the case example, but any kind of other exorcism film. And quick shout out to The Exorcist. There is a beautiful shot in this episode right before Buffy goes home to gather her supplies from her secret little hoard of holy water and stakes and Eucharistic wafers, but it's unclear if they've been consecrated or not. And that's something that
it's such a bizarre, I love that trunk generally as a symbol, because I feel like they've really summarized Buffy in one space. You've got this memory chest, basically, and when she flips it open, the top shelf has a music box, it has a teddy bear or jewelry, just little memento-y type things of the type that I kept in a shoebox under my bed when I was a teenage girl. And then she lifts that out and there's a crucifix and stakes and holy wafers and bottles of holy water and all the kind of vampire hunter accoutrement that we're used to, in Van Helsing's kit. So I love that box. It's great.
Yeah.
So yes, she goes and she collects supplies.
Right. And so before that great scene, we have this shot, it's a second, of a kind of blood red sun that is very, very similar to the opening shot of The Exorcist, the film, where it's setting the scape. It's in Iran, I believe, Iran or Iraq, where they're doing the archaeological dig, where they find Pazuzu, that is the demon that then later causes the possession and exorcism. And so just thinking about that visual language in the show, it's, for those who know The Exorcist, it's definitely doing something intertextually. And I guess I really wanted to just kind of emphasize that scene because, so the episode was written by Joss Whedon, but then it was directed by John T. Kretschmer. But again, not necessarily supporting Joss Whedon, but he grew up in the industry and he's very intertextual in regards to little pop culture quips and alluding to horror films, as we will discuss, and other classic cinema. And so this is a very deliberate choice, I would argue, to kind of go something supernatural. A big showdown is about to go, and it's about demons, and it's about possession in some kind of scopes. A human form possessed. And then they say infected. And I don't know if Giles says that to try to kind of speak this secularized scientific language. As we've kind of talked about previously, vampires have more and more been talked about as infection, especially post-COVID, because of the way that it contaminates, pollutes, infects the blood. And I just think that's an interesting...
Yeah, there was a show that came out just before COVID that's called The Strain.
Guillermo del Toro, right?
I think so, yeah. I watched the first season and then it just felt... I don't know. I didn't enjoy the second season so much, and I forgot I was watching it, which is a terrible criticism, really, isn't it? And then I just never went back to it. But the first season was really interesting, and it very much followed, kind of like the way that I wonder if 28 Days Later didn't really infect vampire narratives with this idea of infection, it being in the blood, it being something that you can pick up. I mean, to be fair, again, I've studied Dracula. I have to nod that Dracula and blood transfusions and so on, it was starting there,
Yeah.
but the idea of blood-based contamination was very new in that era. So it wasn't something, even though the science was being thought about in the physical act of transferring blood between the human men and Lucy Westenra, who was being turned into a vampire via Dracula's bites. It wasn't necessarily as overt, but that is definitely something that's been increasingly added to the discourse. So it's
Yes.
really interesting.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have to do like a bite-sized episode kind of on blood transfusion and how all that informs and like infection, because also we have typhoid, we have consumption, and we have rabies, which are all also kind of medical concepts that really inform the way that the vampire lore shifts in the 19th when we get the vampiric hysteria starting in the beginning of that era. So I think that could be an interesting for us to get a little bit more
Yeah.
historical and dense. But there's
And
a
I
lot
think,
there.
yeah, we'd have to probably throw in the AIDS epidemic as well and
Yes,
think about how the idea of AIDS and infection and the eroticism of vampires and how AIDS was passed, especially in that time. That would be worth thinking about. But we
we
digress. This
digress.
can be a future
Yes.
episode.
Again, future episode. But the 28 days later thing is very timely because 28 years later just released,
Yes.
and also Ebola. So that rage virus was very much influenced by the Ebola epidemics that were occurring in Africa in the late 90s, early
Ooh.
2000s. So again, blood. This is
And stars.
why my thesis is about blood in Buffy, because you can just go down these little, I mean, if you want to get quite metaphoric, veins and capillaries and things, and it just branches out. But so we have a human form possessed and infected. So already this is like really latent. There's a lot of kind of medieval, gothic, medical things. But the really exciting bit is the demon's soul. So,
Yes.
as Alex said, this seems paradoxical. This seems like they can't coexist together. So I say that by using a medieval reading, this can actually make sense. So in the Middle Ages, demons were not necessarily material beings, meaning like physical, like material. There was kind of this hierarchy of different types of spirits or entities that existed within the greater microcosm and macrocosm of the universe. So the microcosm is the body. It's my body, it's Alex's body, it's your body, your pet's body, plants, etc. The macrocosm is the greater universe. It's everything outside of that. And so in the Middle Ages, starting from the early medieval, so, the 6th century, all the way through, there was this idea that the body was porous, that it was influenced by what was occurring in the world around the body. Today, we're having a resurgence of this kind of conceptualization through material and materialities and new materialities. There is in environmental studies and ecology discussions of global warming, pollution, and how that affects our bodies and makes it hard for us to breathe. So, in the Middle Ages, if the body is porous, it's influenced by the weather, pollen, but also the invisible world. And so that includes spirits, it includes sprites or fairies, other, just anything and everything in that regard. And so St. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, comes up with this belief that angels are like ethereal. They're above the air in regards to their lightness. So God is omnipresent, God is everywhere, God is pure everything. And then you have the angels that, of course, because things have to be in a hierarchy, are just below God. And then within that, there's a whole other, some are more material than others. But because demons are the fallen angels, they are not allowed to live in the realm of, purity, of the ether, but they're also denied having a material existence where you can fully enjoy the carnal sins and so like humans and fully get to live in that embodied experience. They're in this kind of quote unquote limbo. So they're spirits that inhabit the air. And that's really interesting because the way then they can get into the body through the holes or pores in our bodies, our ears, our nose, our mouth. This is why we say bless you or God bless you, is because when you sneezed, there was a belief that then that would let the demons or evil spirits enter into you. And so the demon's soul, again, spirit is a little different, but then there was this belief of the spiritus, and that was tethered to the soul. So the soul is its own entity in a body, but it's connected to the body through this substance that's kind of like sticky tack or something like that, kind of like a mystical spiritual glue that keeps the soul into the body. And so, with this idea of spiritus and spirit, the possibility of a demonic soul now becomes able to exist because demons are in this other kind of realm. And also, if it's a demonic soul, it has the implication of an ability to choose, that moral kind of compass. And as we see throughout Buffy, and sometimes in other shows as well, even though they don't have the demon soul, there's a variation in regards to vampiric behavior and the pure evil that they enact and the choices that they make. I don't want to give too much away, so I'm trying to toe a
Well,
thin line
there's
here.
there's a bit that we can discuss in this episode that would help us kind of explore that dynamic without giving anything away from later seasons for people who are kind of watching along with us.
Sure,
But
help
there's
me
a
out.
moment in the plot line of the episode, and again, I hope you've watched the episode before you listen to this podcast. Jesse, the friend of Xander, and I don't think he's as much a friend of Willow. She knows him, but he seems to be Xander's friend. He gets kidnapped by the vampires and is used for bait to attract Buffy into the underground lair to get dispatched. That doesn't work out. They try and rescue Jesse, who still seems to be alive, but then it transpires that Jesse is a vampire. He goes to attack them. They boot him out and escape. But later on, when there's the scene in the Bronze where Luke has been turned into a vessel for the Master, which we'll come back to in just a moment.
Yes.
Jesse is part of the vampire posse attacking the humans of the Bronze. And outside of the Bronze, Xander's like, if I know Jesse, he's messing things up. And Giles turns on Xander and goes, no, 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 that is not your friend. That isn't Jesse. When you see Jesse, you're looking at the thing that killed him. So there's this real, in the way that I've understood vampires in Buffy, is that you get killed by a vampire, your soul disappears. I don't know if that's a heavenly disappearance or whatever, if it's a spiritual, or if you just get deleted out of existence. I'm willing to discuss that further. I'm not sure which it is. But then it's like vacant property. Your body becomes vacant property and the demon soul moves in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more than consciousness, but it's not the goodness of a soul that we've come to understand. And another thing that I've kind of thought about as Buffy moves on through seasons, again, I'll be careful not to give out any spoilers, but I feel like the younger the vampire, the more it's just default demon.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the vampire ages and gains an experience, more of the vampire's personality might come through based on the personality of the host. Like there's still some interplay between those two. So they become a new being.
Yeah, no, that's great, Alex. I thought you were gonna say when Jesse says, "I feel great, man. I feel connected to everything. I can hear the worms in the earth."
Well, and that's interesting as well. Okay, so I just want to pick up on that as well, just for a little moment. So Jesse says, I'm connected to everything, can hear the worms in the earth. You are a shadow to me now. And one of the things that I wanted to point out as you were speaking about this kind of hierarchy and there's God and there's angels and this on, is that is also understood almost physically in the universe. This was something that I very much enjoyed researching in my thesis, is that you have, if you've ever heard like the music of the spheres, that phrase, the music of the spheres. So the universe as it could be seen through medieval technology, and the medieval era knew the world was round. I just need people to know this.
Yeah.
Like they knew. They knew that the universe was around them. Outside the universe was God. Then you have the universe of the spheres. Then you have the planets we can see. Then you have humans, and then you have the earth. But what is interesting is that the earth is kind of like the plug hole of the universe. Evil is understood as being heavy, and so sinks from heaven and the spheres and gathers in earth and then goes down into like the hellish, like, because hell is kind of understood to be subterranean as well as spiritual. So sin has weight to it. And Earth is kind of known as the sublunary world, the world that is beneath the moon, where all the dross gathers. And that's us, that's where we live. And so I feel like that kind of speaks to this vampiric pollution that can happen, that we are just souls encased in meat that are doing our best in the drain of the universe. And we have a lot against us.
Yeah, that's great. And also the idea of, oh, you're but a shadow to me, because then it can evoke is because Jesse's now further from the light.
Yeah.
Is it kind of like a Platonic, allegory of the cave sort of thing?
Yeah, the shadows.
But then because he's connected to the earth and he can hear the worms, they almost become more part of the macrocosm because they're
Mm.
this other entity and possibly resurrected out of time. Again, that's something we can get to later.
Yeah.
But also it shows that microcosm, macrocosm kind of idea. Don't know. And so yeah, Jesse is really interesting with that. And Giles, we will get to this in a few more episodes to like unpack it a bit more, but Giles is saying it's just the demon. It has the body's memories and the memories of the person, but the soul is gone. As Alex said, we don't know where it goes. It doesn't, I will say right now that it doesn't just disappear like into a void of nothing, because we will see in Buffy souls being called back in some capacity.
It's the vampire. This
Yeah.
would be interesting for us to discuss. I won't get into it now. This is too much of a rabbit hole. Let's
Yes.
refocus.
But so yeah, again, we can't do it all in one episode without boring you all, but this is something we will be returning to. So the idea of the vampiric soul, to say the least, it's not just saying possessed by the demon, because that would be, we would think, oh, it's like a material demon. It's not material, but because it's a soul, there is something inherently different that is calling upon a theological concept, a Christianized, we will argue, theological concept that is, I think, very medieval. And yeah, we will keep returning to that because we have in a few episodes something that will allow us to discuss that a bit more from a conversation that Giles has and some other characters have. But conscientious of time, we will kind of put a little pin or a plug, if you will, in the vampiric soul conversation for now. But it's something to just say there's a lot going on there. And let's talk about kind of more literal religious things that are occurring in the episode and how Buffy, either secularizes or makes its own theology of our
Yeah.
universe. So, Alex, take it away.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite scenes of the episode. And for context, we have the master is trapped underground. He needs to gather souls in order to have the strength to break free of his trap underground. He is using Luke, the big bad at the start of the episode, who's in the coffin with Buffy, as a vessel. So what Luke eats, the master digests and gets the nourishment from, so to speak. That's a disgusting way
Yeah,
of
I was gonna go.
describing
We'll
it.
return to that.
But what really interests me about it is again this interaction with Catholic ritual in a subverted way. So Luke gains a symbol on his forehead that's kind of like a three-pointed cross or a star. It's
Yeah.
just got like it's like a three-pointed symbol, which is exactly where holy water goes in like baptismal practices,
Mhm.
or ash on Ash Wednesday gets drawn across the forehead. And fun fact, in Dracula, when Mina gets scarred with a holy wafer, she's scarred on her forehead in that place, and it becomes like a crescent moon shape. And she gets this psychic relationship with Dracula as a result of her vampirism, which is all symbolized by this mark on her forehead. So we have this kind of Gothic Catholic inheritance all just in Luke being marked on the forehead.
Yes.
Which is fascinating. And again, going to bring in the medieval because that's what we're here for. In Mallory narratives, for example, knights of the Holy Grail quest will make the sign of the cross on their foreheads to call to God to ask for help. So there is this one instance where there is a knight who comes to a stream and there is a demon in the stream causing the water to freak out. And the knight makes the sign of the cross on his forehead, and the demon feels the influence of God and runs away crying and roaring, which I like as a quote. And so I can't remember, Petrasso, is it Petrasso who says it? She acknowledges that the sign of the cross on the forehead is a symbol of the knight's direct spiritual link with God. So here we have Luke getting an inverted symbol on his forehead that gives him an unholy link with the master. So I find that I doubt Joss Whedon has read Mallory, and yet there is this medieval inheritance in Gothic and horror that means that the medieval just slips in through the back door and the cracks around the edges all the time in ways you don't expect.
Yeah, it's that kind of continuity of these concepts and these ideas, what I in my thesis called a crypto medieval. So, crypto, secret, hidden underneath, and then medieval. So, exactly with that. And the thing is perhaps the correlations, these especially the medieval components that you've just touched upon with Mallory, Alex, they may not be, again, we know that Whedon and a lot of the writers know Shakespeare because they would have Shakespeare Sundays and they would all go and have a great day and read
Yeah.
Shakespeare together.
There's there's an anecdote I saw of James Masters. He'll be popping up in the second season, but he plays Spike. And he came to his Buffy audition fresh from having just done a Shakespeare
Yeah.
play in the theater, and he was reciting Shakespeare before his audition to try and psych out the other actors who
Yeah.
were auditioning for Spike. Oh, which I
Right.
find cute. But yes, so they were aware of Shakespeare.
Right. And then as we know, and for those of you that don't know, Shakespeare, a lot of his plays are set in a medieval time, and I guess we can touch upon that as we go.
Of course. And it's also worth noticing that Shakespeare's lifetime will have straddled the movement from the medieval period to the Tudor period in the UK.
Yes.
There's political tensions and things going on. So it's not like there was a nice clean break when Henry VIII says, no, no more Catholicism, we're doing Church of England now. It's not like everyone stopped thinking along medieval lines. There is a lot of tension in Shakespeare plays
Mhm.
where they're trying to divest themselves of the medieval while still having this cultural anxiety of, but there's hell. How are we supposed to change our minds about where we go after we die just because a king wanted a fresh wife?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Shakespeare himself isn't free of medieval influences in so many ways and facets. So, yes, do please continue.
Great. And so with that, the continuity of, in horror, so again, using Lucy Westenra and Francis Ford Coppola's film, right, there is that kind of symbolic continuity of the wafer and the Eucharist. So just showing how these ideas are, again, perpetuated knowingly or not. By knowingly, I mean knowing that it's from the medieval period and that you're making this like medievalized universe. It's different than James or Machen and everything. But also, this scene, aside from being, you say subversion, I also like to say inversion of the
Ooh.
Ash Wednesday because those have two different kind of connotations. I mean, we've all probably at some point in our lives seen someone walk around with ashes on their forehead. It's part of that popular mythology, to go back to Giles. These are things that are very just kind of saturated in the general lived lexicon. But not only do we have this mystical connection made through this symbol on the forehead, it's made through an exchange of blood. And not only that, it's two vampires' bloods, and the master says, my soul is now your soul. What? I love it because I didn't get to it because it's very complex, but there was a medieval belief that the blood was the seat of the soul. So so the soul existed in the blood that circulates the body. It's not pinpointed in one place. The blood is the soul because it transports the soul to animate the body and allow the body to function. But at
So,
the
does that
same, oh,
I just wanted to ask, does that mean that the soul is almost like a separate fluid within the blood in their understandings? Or is it a spiritual
oh,
contaminant almost of the blood? Like, where is the soul within the blood in medieval theory?
it's very unclear. It's just kind of a theological metaphysics that's taken, because then you also have the heart that's known as the seat of the soul as well, because it's the primary organ that circulates the blood,
Of course.
even though blood circulation as a whole wasn't in the Western world known until 1626, 1627 by Harvey, but they knew that the heart, pumped and that blood went in and out and informed the body and everything. So, where exactly the soul resides is everywhere all at once in the blood, but I never came across something where it was like spiritus, right? That kind of sticky tack.
Okay.
It's very ethereal and everywhere and fluid and material, but because the soul's also divine in a sense, it's from God, it's of the other planes or world. It's not like bound to the body in the same way. Hopefully that it didn't confuse everyone. It is very
No,
confusing.
it's one of those things like where you say, and the soul is in the blood. And I know what you mean, but I just know from reading your thesis for the first time, that fascinated me and your thesis explained it, but I knew that our listeners would have similar questions of like, is it like bubbles in carbonated water? Is that how the soul moves through the blood? Like, so I just wanted us to unpack that for a moment, just so that people could understand it's a spiritual process as much as a physical process. It's
Yeah.
never quite solidly defined in one camp or another,
No, and of
would you
course,
say?
in the Middle Ages, they didn't have atoms and molecules and electrons and
No,
protons like
no,
we
no.
do, but you could argue that it exists at that kind of fundamental level, but in a invisible way where it's like bonded to the molecules, but not contingent
Yeah.
on them, if that makes sense.
Well, in the same, like we just say our soul infuses our body. Like if you were to ask a modern religious person, where is your soul? They just kind of go, it's all up in here.
Yeah,
So it's a
exactly.
similar way where it is all up in here, but in the medieval specific to the blood.
Yeah, and one just
Cool.
kind of quick aside is that also the idea in the later Middle Ages was that possession occurred in the blood. It didn't occur in the heart or the. It could happen in the mind. It's kind of confusing that, but it could never inhabit the heart, even though blood goes through the heart, because the heart is the seat of the soul, so it's sacred. So the demonic soul, the demonic spirit or entity cannot infiltrate that, but it can do the rest of the body, especially the bowels, because that
Of
is
course.
contamination. But because it's the blood in the body, but that's also where the soul is. Again, it's this really compelling. We will return to it because I can't do it all at once.
It's interesting as well to apply this to Buffy again. Why, therefore, is staking the heart so effective at killing a vampire, which is essentially possessed by a demon? If the demon can't access the heart, what does that do? Ooh, there's
Right.
a lot that we
Well, and
can
that
unpack
also
later.
goes off traditional belief. We now have, because of science and medicine, it's more about when the brain activity stops, that's when the body is like dead, even if it's still like living and doing its processes. But up until I mean, even today, it's believed that once the heart stops, the body stops. But yeah, in Buffy, the vampiric body on Buffy is fascinating because it rapidly heals, and we have seen that like hair can grow. We'll kind of get on that and stuff. So the body is still
It's
I
still bodying.
yeah, I call vampires and Buffy undead with like in parentheses because they're in this really bizarre, they're living entities, but not like zombies because they're able to live and speak and be in the world and engage with humans and grow as a self, right? But at the same time, they're eternal until you slay them or they go in the sunlight or whatnot. So it's this, again, it's a paradox. And that's very medieval. The Middle Ages loved a paradox. They love it when things are both sides of the coin, having their cake and eat it too. Middle Ages are full of it.
Yeah, it was very much to be honest, the way that a lot of medieval religious understanding worked was kind of like a Zen koan. You know how a koan is supposed to knock you out of your habitual way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, does it fall kind of business? You're supposed to like get caught up in the mystery of what's being said. A lot of the monstrosity of the Middle Ages was there to prove God's existence because you had to grapple with the idea of this grotesqueness being the antithesis of God. So it was really interesting how they loved this ambivalence and this juxtaposition because that was the point. It wasn't necessarily that they just hadn't thought things through. They were very sophisticated and they were doing really interesting things. It's like demons and monsters were a riddle and the
Mm-hmm.
answer to the riddle would be God. So interesting.
But yeah, it wasn't just like demons, straight line, God. It's this labyrinth maze that
Yeah.
I mean, reading Thomas Aquinas, for example, and all his objections and refutations and points posited, it's like law or something almost, like just all the different components. But one other thing, briefly, with this moment of inversion and the sharing of souls that mystically connects, is Luke being described as the vessel. I just wanted to say that's a
Mm.
very biblical term. Vessel is a very particular word, and it's interesting here because vessel is usually associated with femininity. So the womb is like that word literally comes from the ancient Greek, I believe, for like vessel, for space of carrying and holding. But also, I mean, there's biblical passages and everything. I won't bore you all with that, but it's this idea that he's, as the vessel, he's carrying something, but vessels can be emptied. So it's just this exchange moment. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. I think the whole drama of the scene.
I wrote it down. Do you mind if I read it a little bit? Because I
Yeah,
just
and
love.
isn't your like quote or scene stealer in this scene, Alex?
I mean, potentially, yes. I mean, my serious scene stealer, which is just also scenery chewing, is in this one. But I do have like a little fun. Ooh, my chair just cracked. I'll start again. Yes, this is definitely my dramatic slash academic scene stealer. So it's this moment where the master has Luke in front of him and he's drawing the symbol on his forehead and he says, "Every soul he, Luke, takes will feed me, and their souls will grant me the strength to free myself. Tonight I shall walk the earth, and the stars themselves will hide." And it's just that he does it with such gravitas. And again, I really love the idea of the stars hiding because you have the old ones already introduced. So you have this idea of this like entropic, malignant presence in the universe. And this little rodenty looking creature in a basement is going to cause them to hide. Like, I love that the first two episodes have to do so much to get Buffy across. Like,
Yeah.
I forget that this counts as an apocalypse that gets averted, that the first apocalypse is the master trying to get out of basement.
Yeah.
Like, it's so cute.
Just a
But
quick
yeah,
thing.
so
I was just going to say quickly on that, Alex, because the first part of that quote is he says, "On this most hallowed night." Again, it's just this use. Last episode, you talked about
yeah,
Luke's use of amen. And just
yeah,
hinted the language they are literally borrowing from words that are used to describe religion. And then rituals themselves. And also, why are the vampires doing a basically a Catholic ritual? Why is there not
yeah.
something else? So it's these old powers using old ritual because is there more essence, like power to that?
But even then, it's not that old. The old ones are like way before Christian theology.
Deep
So
time.
Catholicism, especially medieval Catholicism, a few thousand years old. These demons, millennia. So why would they use what is to them is technology to us?
Why are they using floppy disks?
Exactly. What are they up to? And I think it's really interesting as well that you picked up on Luke being a vessel. So I find it really strange that Luke bites the people fill Luke, who is the vessel, but then that just gets whipped away spiritually to the master because you can see him in the basement. He's getting stronger and he's testing the force field and he's almost able to break free.
Give me more.
As well, they call the humans who get bitten offerings.
Yes, which that is incredibly, I mean, you have offerings to saints, offerings to the Catholic deity and sacred figures, but you also have offerings to all other deities, to pagan gods.
Even ancestral offerings, that's very common in a lot of different religions and belief systems around the world,
Mhm.
where you will acknowledge the people genetically who went before you and, other forms of inheritance you can have from the people who have gone before. And you make offerings to them to keep up that line of relationship and connection. And then you have these victims being offerings.
Yeah, it's great. It's very interesting. And you've frozen, Alex.
I'm still here.
Okay, there you are. You were just frozen on the screen. So, was "the stars will hide"? Is that your quote? Or what is your quote
Well,
then?
that was my quote that I shall walk the earth and the stars themselves will hide. Just
It's great.
the drama of it and the scenery chewing. It's just there's a certain amount of schlockiness in early Buffy where it's
Yes.
still trying to figure itself out. It doesn't know if it's camp, it doesn't know if it's horror, it doesn't know if it's serious. It's like there's another lovely scene where Buffy's rescuing Xander and Willow right at the beginning and she has to break off a tree branch, but they haven't even figured out the choreography of how she moves yet. So she just does these little like bunny hops
Yeah,
kind of towards the tree and then kind of bunny hops to the vampire and goes, stab.
it's
It's so
very
awkward.
like Mortal Kombat 1, where they're kind of standing there bouncing, and then it's
Yeah,
jab, bounce, bounce,
yeah.
jab.
And it's trying to make it look dynamic, but it really is like 3 or 4 seconds long of just this teenage girl going, I gotta get to the tree,
Yeah.
and then I gotta get from the tree to the vampire. Ab.
Yeah, it's great. I definitely noticed that. And I'll just quickly say that so my scene stealer in every scene, I mean, you could just say the master, but for me specifically, it's the master's hands. So every time they have him and he kind of just pivots awkwardly, his hands are always just so stiff. And I said this, I think, last episode because of the prosthetics and fake nails he has,
Mm.
but they just bring me such joy because they're just so dramatic. So, scene stealer, master's hands, but also just the master. Again, Metcalf,
Well, this
chef's kiss.
is perfection. There's that great one of my almost scene stealers was again the master and his hands because he goes, "You failed me. Don't do it again. You've got something in your eye," and then you just see the hands kind of like jab, and it's like, oh, I see what you did there, but it's just so yeah, chef's kiss. You're
Love
right. He's
it.
perfect.
And then, I mean, in regards to my quote, I either have give me more because it's just kind of goofy because Luke's, feeding on the offerings on the humans, and
Yeah.
the master's just in his weeble wobble subterranean cave and he's just shaking his hands at the sky, more. No one can hear him, but it's so dramatic. And then my second kind of quote that is still a funny one, and it's actually another vampire, is it's related to the kind of drama and just performativity or ritual of the whole thing, is when Darla comes over to steal Cordelia from Vampire Jesse. She's like, they're all for the master. So Jesse eventually lets go of Cordelia, and it's just this funny, very kind of 90s feeling beat where he goes, "Don't I get one?" And just the
Yeah.
way that Eric Balfour like delivers that line is really funny because he kind of has like a body head shake, and it felt kind of like it's very like Scooby-Doo to me for some reason. I don't know why that's what the term I want to use, but it really made me laugh out loud this time because I think it really shows the kind of weird dynamics of the vampires, because Darla was snacking on Jesse before she gave
Oh
him to
yeah.
the master because his blood's pure, as she said, and other things like that, and the selfishness of vampires, but then also their it's not reliance, it's not responsibility, their
Dependence?
no devotion, their superiors. We see that throughout the series is their
Subordination?
sure. So it also shows the vampiric subordination to their, in this case, quite literally the master, but to whoever the big bad is, they do it for the sake of that kind of cult leader, that big bad.
Yeah.
And so it's just this funny, we will see that time and time again, but then Eric Balfour's delivery, and he dies, he's dusted shortly thereafter. So I also wanted to give him a small shout out before.
Such a waste. I feel like he was underused. I get why for the pilot like pairing episodes it makes sense,
Yeah.
but it would have been nice to see more of him. But I would also like to give an honorable mention, if I may, because this was my
Mhm.
other scenes, like my scene stealer. So my quote was "The stars themselves will hide."
Yes.
And I've just remembered that my scene stealer was actually Willow. And Willow for me steals the scene when she's in the computer room with the teenagers and Cordelia is just torturing her in that typical Cordelia way. Who gave you permission to exist? Like
It's
it's
such
just
a 90s. The guy comes over. What are you talking about?
what's going on with his hair swinging because he's like surf dude, skater dude. But then they're like, okay, how do we do this computer thing? Aren't the nerds supposed to do this coding for us? What are we supposed to do? And Cordelia says, okay, so how do I save? And without batting an eye or missing a beat, Willow just says, deliver, and leaves. And they go deliver and hit del, which of course we know means delete. And they've just lost everything they've put together. And I love that it shows us that Willow isn't a complete pushover, which she kind of appeared to be in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
She isn't all sweetness and kindness and cold anxiety sweats when her library books are overdue. She is willing to use her intellect for evil, small evil,
Yes.
but she will use it for evil. And it's right there in that moment where she goes, deliver,
And
with
she's
those Bambi eyes.
yeah, and she's very quick on her feet. We also see Buffy being very quick on her feet, thinking about the mausoleum and where Luke came from. And just one final thing on that, because I kind of thought of it as a scene stealer, just showing as they're developing Willow's character when they're looking at the very, very funny city council maps of the sewers and the underground, and it's just lines that make nonsense. And Giles says, I didn't realize that the city council plans were public access. And Willow's like, kind of, well, they're not really. I maybe might have decrypted the city council's security system. Why are you doing that in your spare time? Why is that what you decide to decrypt? And it becomes very important, Willow's technological
Yeah.
abilities. And as we'll discuss in future episodes, Buffy's right on that cusp of technology really changing the way you can tell stories. We
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have the cell phones everywhere, but they use the net or surf the web, and that's where they get their resources. And we see throughout the series, the internet started taking leaps and bounds in regards to access and information and knowledge and connectivity via messaging and everything. But yeah, I just loved that. And also horrifying flashbacks to computer science courses in high school. I had to do them
Oh,
freshman year and sophomore year. Thankfully, we just went beat by beat from the books, but I don't think that's taught anymore. But from the age of about, I don't know, 10 all the way to 15, I had to take some sort of computer course. This is how you
yeah.
PowerPoint. This is how
Yeah.
you this.
It was very clunky coding as well. Like the young folks, you will not know the horrors of trying to create a direct link in a Word document where you can't just right click and then link and then put in the URL. You have to know the code to create all of that. And you went, oh, it was a nightmare. Anyway,
Yeah, I blocked it
this is
out.
neither
Don't know how to
medieval
do
nor
it now.
Buffy. It's just a millennial
Yeah,
complaint.
I think that, for the most part, that's everything we had to discuss. I guess one final, just really quick bit, because of, time, is that this episode quite deliberately and specifically delineates ways to kill a vampire between Buffy and
Yeah.
Xander when they're going down into the subterranean network of sewers and hallways that have too many turns. And so, just to quickly kind of paraphrase that, Xander's like, all right, so we've got crosses, garlic, stake through the heart. What else? And Buffy also says, fire, beheading, sunlight, holy water, the usual. And so we now know those are all the ways you can either harm or kill a vampire. We know that holy water, when it's splashed on a vampire, does not kill them because Darla runs away steaming, but she's still very
Yeah.
much alive, but it does
It's
physically hurt them.
Yeah, it's like an acid. You can
Yeah.
envision it as a spiritual acid.
And that crosses make them step back, but also because we have the master in this subterranean place of worship. As he says, gotta assume that there's crosses somewhere down there, so it repels them, but it doesn't harm them.
Yeah.
I think
And
if you
there is,
touch them with it, it might, but we don't really ever
yeah,
see
it
that.
burns. We do see that a cross will burn a vampire when it's pressed against them. I will tell you
Yes.
afterwards, but it's a spoiler.
No, I know which
But
one you're
also,
talking about, but that's also a very
yeah.
specific type of cross, if we're thinking of the same one.
But there's also a scene where, and this isn't a spoiler, this is just general geography, where at some point a vampire goes into a church and the vampire gets kind of sweaty and stressed being in the church and they're talking to a priest to get intel. But you can tell they're physically uncomfortable to be in that space.
Yeah.
They're not bursting into flames, they're not being crushed by the pressure of worship. They're just kind of nauseated by being in that space.
Yeah. So again, there will be more to kind of complicate that. And as they come up, we will revisit. But just for now, for you all to know that yes, the way that a vampire exists in the world in Buffy might be different than what we're used to because of the demonic soul. The way that you can fight them or slay them, canon in regards to vampiric lore and everything. So, any final thoughts, Alex?
I feel like we have covered everything I wanted to say. It's just really nice to re enter the Buffyverse for a little while, actually, and just hear all the sarcasm and the quips and seeing the library. Like, growing up watching Buffy, that library was my second home. So it's really nice to revisit it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Even though I'm fresh off the thesis, it's nice to watch Buffy for the fun of it. And
Yeah.
thankfully, throughout my thesis, I never despised Buffy. I always had a lot of love for it. And watching it now, it's not kind of like, okay, we're doing this for the podcast. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm
It's
loving
lovely.
discussing it with you.
Me too. It's such a good time.
Yeah. So I guess with that, Alex, for your sign off, what would you like to share? People can find you those bits if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Alex Carabine. I'm most active on Instagram. You can find me either under Alex Carabine or Decadence and Dark Ages is my Instagram handle with a full stop between each word. And I look at art history and Gothic studies. I also host workshops and tutorials and seminars and talks online via Zoom as well, all of which you can find information on through my website, literatureunlocked.com.
Amazing. And
And what about you? Where can folks find you?
I'm Dr. Meaghan Allen. You can also find me on Instagram at morbid.may, and May is spelled M-A. You can also find me under the name Meaghan Allen, anywhere online. You can also find information about these episodes and a bit more about us and links to Literature Unlocked and the like on our website, damesmacabre.com. Apologies for the website at this stage. As I just said, coding is not my life. So figuring it out as we go. And yeah, I currently don't have really any other platforms or networks for you to check out, but definitely check out Alex. And as this continues, I will become more and more in that world. I'm just enjoying finishing a thesis right now and in my month of relaxation.
Yes, absolutely. I cannot understate to the audience the coma that occurs after finishing a thesis of just I'm free, just the weight that lifts off you. So I really hope you're taking the time to enjoy that month. That sounds fantastic.
Doing my best. But yeah, until next time, I'm Meaghan.
I'm Alex.
And this is Dames Macabre.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.